The dining room table was made of walnut, 2 inches thick, cut from a single tree that my great-grandfather had felled on the property in 1951. I know this because Grandma Celestine told me the story every time she ran her palm across the grain. The same slow gesture, left to right, like she was reading something the wood had written. I'm standing at the head of that table now. My cousin Dravon is across from me. His wife Pamela sits beside him, her hands folded in a performance of patience she has never once actually felt. My Uncle Bertrand is in the corner pretending to look at his phone. The family attorney, a man named Wallace Greer who had been practicing law for 31 years and had seen most things, is watching me with an expression I will not forget. And on the table between us all, sitting flat and unadorned next to a stack of manila folders, is Grandma Celestine's blue ceramic salt shaker. The one she kept on the kitchen windowsill for 40 years, the one Pamela had tried to throw away twice. They are waiting for me to say something that will make this easier for them. I don't say it. Welcome to Calm Revenge Tales. I'm glad you found this channel. We tell stories here about quiet people who are underestimated, and about what happens when patience stops being passivity and becomes something else entirely. If that sounds like what you need today, subscribe before we go any further. Justice is coming, but it moves at its own speed. My name is Theodora Voss-Mallard, and at the time this story begins, I was 38 years old, working as a contract paralegal for 3 small firms in the greater Memphis metro area. I had no office, no business cards, no health insurance from an employer. What I had was a client list, a reputation for precision, and a second bedroom I had converted entirely into a filing system. I had bought my house outright at 34, a pale green Craftsman on Somerville Avenue, by living 6 years on a budget that would have made most people I know quit within a month. I had no debt. I had nobody to thank for that except the version of myself who had refused to be comfortable too soon. My grandmother Celestine Odette Voss was 81 years old. She lived alone on a 14-acre property in Tipton County, the same land my great-grandfather had farmed, then my grandfather, then nobody in particular once the farming ended and the family scattered toward cities and opinions. She had a vegetable garden that she still tended herself. She had a dog named Wednesday. She had a walnut table and a blue ceramic salt shaker, and a memory sharp enough to embarrass people half her age. The rest of the family had decided, without consulting her, that she was a burden. They called it concern. They framed it as love. They talked about her safety, her isolation, her age. But when I would drive the 40 minutes to visit her on Tuesday evenings, and I did almost every Tuesday for 6 years, Celestine Odette Voss did not look like a burden to me. She looked like someone sitting in her own kitchen, frying catfish in a cast-iron skillet, humming something too low to identify, entirely content in the life she had built. They want me to be small, she told me once, not with bitterness, just as an observation. I'm not going to do it. The dinner was Drevon's idea, framed as a family reconciliation. His mother, my Aunt Rosetta, Celestine's eldest daughter, had apparently decided that what the family needed was a gathering, a meal, a conversation about the future. The invitation came through a group text that I was added to without being asked. The conditions were buried in the logistics. It would be held at Dravon and Pamela's house in Germantown, not at Celestine's. Celestine would be driven there by Rosetta, not allowed to drive herself. The agenda, such as it was, included a discussion of long-term care options. Pamela had already sent a separate text to a subgroup of family members, one I was not supposed to be on, and only saw because my cousin Frederica had forwarded it by mistake, saying that if Celestine was going to be, quote, stubborn about the property, they needed to present a united front. I saved that text. I saved it to 2 places. I went to the dinner because Celestine called me the night before. She said, Teddy, they're going to try something at this dinner, and I don't want to be the only one in the room who knows it. She paused. Then she said, bring your listening ears. She had been saying that to me since I was 4 years old. Bring your listening ears. It meant, pay attention to what isn't being said. The irony, which I noticed but did not remark on at the time, is that Celestine had said almost the same thing to me when I was 17 and starting my first job. She had also said it to me 2 months earlier, on the phone, when I had asked her about the property deed. She had gone very quiet after that. Then she said, "Everything is the way it needs to be." At the time I thought she meant she had it handled. I didn't yet understand the scope of what handled meant. The dinner was a pot roast that Pamela had clearly made from a packet. I don't say this to be unkind. I say it because it matters that it was a meal constructed to perform hospitality without actually extending any. The vegetables were soft in a way that meant they had been cooked 2 hours too long, and then reheated. Celestine ate it without complaint. The way she ate everything she didn't make herself, methodically, without expression. Rosetta opened the conversation about 15 minutes in. She talked about memory loss in seniors, which was an insult delivered as a statistic. She talked about the farmhouse and its maintenance challenges. She used the phrase fresh start 3 times. Drayvon said the property was worth significant money, and that hanging on to it for sentimental reasons wasn't fair to anyone. I watched Celestine's hands around her fork. They didn't still. She kept eating. Then Pamela said, "Well, it's not like any of us can afford to just subsidize Celestine's independence forever. Especially not Theodora. She's the one who said she was broke just last spring." She said it like a weapon she'd been carrying all night, waiting for the right target. I had told Rosetta privately in April that I was between contracts and watching my expenses. Rosetta had told Pamela. Pamela had told the room. I said quietly, "I'm not asking anyone to subsidize anything." Drayvon leaned forward. He said that someone needed to be realistic, and that the property had been essentially stagnant for decades, and that if Celestine wasn't going to use it productively, the family should discuss whether a management trust could be established. Celestine put her fork down. She said, "Whose name do you think is on the trust?" Nobody answered. She looked at me. I said, "Let's go, Grandma." We left. She walked out on her own slowly in her good shoes, and she didn't look back at the table. I held the door. I had a choice in that moment. I could have said something that would have been accurate, withering, and entirely satisfying. I chose not to. Not because I was the better person. Because I already knew the document existed, and I understood that the room would be explained to itself in time. Celestine moved in with me 6 days later. Not because I asked her to and not because she had to, but because she said she was tired of rattling around in a house where the nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile away and Wednesday had started sleeping too long during the days. She brought her cast-iron skillet, a cardboard box of papers, and the blue ceramic salt shaker, which she placed on my kitchen windowsill the first morning like she was staking a claim. The adjustment was specific. I rearranged my office to give her the room with the east window, because she had always woken with the light. I bought a ramp for the front step that cost me $240. I moved my filing system into the dining room, which meant I ate at my desk for 4 months. I did not find this difficult. The family made contact 3 times in the first year. Rosetta called in October to say that things had gotten out of hand, and that she hoped I understood she'd only had Celestine's best interests in mind. She suggested a meeting, just the 3 of us without Drayvon, to talk about next steps. I asked her what next steps meant without reference to the property. She went quiet. I told her I had work to finish and hung up. Drayvon emailed in January. He had found a boutique assisted living community that was very highly rated, and he had taken the liberty of getting pricing information, which he attached. I did not open the attachment. I replied, "Celestine as well. She is not interested. Tivas Mallard." Pamela texted in March to say she'd been thinking about us, and was I open to a coffee. I didn't reply for 3 weeks, and then only to say I hoped she was well. In none of these communications did anyone ask how Celestine was doing. They asked about the property or they asked about me, but they never asked about her directly, which told me more than any document could. What they didn't know, what only I knew, because Celestine had shown me the cardboard box's contents on a Tuesday evening in November, after she made her cornbread recipe, and we sat at my dining room table with its old paint rings and its mismatched chairs, was the nature of the arrangement she had made 17 years ago. The box contained, among other things, a revocable living trust dated in 2007. It named me Theodora Celestine Voss Mallard. I had taken her middle name, a thing Rosetta had always called performative, as sole trustee and sole beneficiary of the 14-acre Tipton County property, the farmhouse and all structures thereon. She slid it across the table to me like it was a grocery list. I drew that up, she said. The year you bought your house by yourself. I thought. That one knows what land means. I looked at the paper for a long time. Then I looked at her. She said, "Don't make a face. It's just paperwork." If you've been with this story since the beginning, you already understand that it is not just paperwork. If you're new here, subscribe now, because the moment of clarity is close and you don't want it to find you somewhere else. Celestine died on a Thursday in late February, the year she turned 83. It was not sudden and it was not a shock. Her heart had been asking for less for about 8 months. But it was quiet, which was the way she had lived, and it felt like the right shape for her. Wednesday slept on her feet until the end. She had said one more thing to me, near the end of February, when talking had become something she had to budget. She looked at the salt shaker on the windowsill and she said, "That was my mother's. Don't let them have it." Those were the last real words she said to me. The letter from Wallace Greer's office arrived 4 weeks after the funeral. It was addressed to the family, carbon copied to all of Celestine's adult children and grandchildren. It announced a reading of the estate, a formal meeting at Greer's office in Covington, and it asked everyone to come prepared to discuss the trust document on file. I arrived early. I put the blue ceramic salt shaker on the conference table in front of my chair. Greer raised one eyebrow at it and did not ask. The family filed in. Drayvon came in with a folder of his own, which I found almost admirable in its optimism. Rosetta sat at the far end of the table and would not look at me. Pamela sat beside Drayvon, and I watched her take in the salt shaker without recognition, then look away. Frederica, my cousin, the one who'd forwarded the group text, sat quietly to my left. She had brought nothing. She had texted me the morning before to say she was sorry about Celestine. It was the only message from anyone in that family, in the 4 weeks since the funeral, that contained her name. Greer opened the meeting. He explained the trust. He read the figures. The property had been appraised in January at $680,000, a number that is not a surprise when you understand that 14 acres of Tipton County farmland adjacent to a planned development corridor tends to move in one direction. Rosetta said, "There must be an error." There was no error. Drayvon stood up. He said this wasn't legal. He said Celestine had not been competent to make this decision. He said 17 years ago she may have been pressured or misled. He said all of this loudly, and his voice had the quality of a door being rattled from outside by someone who has already tried the handle. Pamela began to cry. It was a specific kind of crying, the kind that is a performance of grief but contains, underneath it, the texture of a calculation going wrong. Bertrand, my uncle, who had been mostly silent throughout all of this, Bertrand looked down at the table. His hands went flat on the surface. He was the one who had been there when the trust was drawn up. I found out later. He had known. And the look on his face in that moment was not outrage. It was the look of someone who had been hoping a thing would not happen, and now it was happening. And they had to sit with the fact that they had let it go as far as it had. I had been holding on to one thing Celestine said about Bertrand, years ago. She told me he was a man who understood right from wrong perfectly well, and just found wrong more convenient. I had never used that against him. I didn't use it now. I waited until the room settled. Then I picked up the salt shaker. I turned it once in my hands. I set it back down. I said, "She told me everything is the way it needs to be." I said, "The trust is valid, it was drawn up by competent counsel, and it has been in place for 17 years without contest. If you'd like to challenge it, you're welcome to. But I'd encourage you to consider that the document you'd be challenging is one she wrote." Then I said, "She also said, whose name do you think is on the trust?" That was the last thing she'd said at the dinner table, the night we left. Rosetta recognized it. Her mouth closed. The legal challenge lasted 4 months. It did not succeed. The trust was clear, the signature was witnessed, the attorney had contemporaneous notes of Celestine's expressed wishes and her reasons. The challenge cost Dreven's family approximately $18,000 in legal fees that achieved nothing. I am aware that this is a specific number. I mention it because specificity is a form of honesty. I made one offer before the challenge was filed. I offered Rosetta the right of first refusal to purchase the farmhouse itself. Not the land, just the structure. At appraised value, if she wanted to keep it in the family. I made the offer in writing. She declined within 48 hours, which I think was more about refusing to acknowledge the power structure of the transaction than about the money. That declination is documented. It meant I could proceed without carrying the weight of having left a door unopened. Frederica asked me, after it was all settled, if she could have a cutting from the rose bush Celestine had grown along the back fence. I told her to take two. The farmhouse sold 8 months later. I put $300,000 into a community land trust that works with first-generation homeowners in Shelby County. I kept the rest. I kept the property taxes current on the acre around the farmhouse until the sale closed, which cost me $700 and a few hours of paperwork, which is the kind of work I do well. Drayvon and Pamela do not contact me. Rosetta sends a text on holidays that I answer with a cordial sentence. Bertrand called me once, 6 months later, and did not say much, and I did not ask him to. On my kitchen windowsill, where she placed it the first morning she arrived, there is a blue ceramic salt shaker. It is my mother's object, and it has made food taste right in 3 different kitchens, and now it is in mine. On Tuesday evenings I still drive to Tipton County sometimes. I park at the fence. I sit with the window down and listen to the way that much land sounds in the early dark. Celestine believed that land remembered who had cared for it, the same way wood remembered where it had been cut. I don't know if that's true, but I bring my listening ears. If this story stayed with you, if you thought of someone while you listened, then this channel did what it was built to do. Every story here is about the same thing. The people who are quiet for years, and then let the paperwork speak. Share this with someone who has always done the right thing without recognition. Comment below with the name of someone in your life who deserved more than they got. Subscribe, because these stories exist to find the people who need them. I'll see you in the next one.